Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
Mom slid the cup toward me with that bright hostess smile she saves for when she wants to look harmless, saying we should start over and that she had brewed something soothing because she knows I get tense at family dinners. And I nodded like the good daughter I have pretended to be for most of my life. Then I lifted the cup without a word, placed it by my sister's plate as if I had simply grabbed the wrong one, and watched the smallest ripple pass through Mom's face. Not fear exactly, but a flash of calculation interrupted, the way a gambler blinks when the card that should have stayed hidden lands face up on the table where everyone can see it. I did not do it to be dramatic, and I did not do it because I wanted my sister hurt. I did it because there are moments when you either prove to yourself that you are not crazy, or you accept the story everyone else is comfortable telling about you. And I was done being the one who swallowed things to keep the peace while being told I was too sensitive, too cold, too everything that made me easy to blame whenever Mom needed a villain who would not cry in front of guests. My sister reached for the cup with her usual distracted trust, the same trust that let her believe for years that our mother is just intensely loving and not strategic, and she took a mouthful the way she does when she is trying to signal she is on Mom's team. And within seconds she was pressing a napkin to her lips and clearing her throat in that rasp I have heard since childhood when certain herbal blends hit her the wrong way. Not a hospital situation, but not nothing either, and the sound cut through the room like a chair scraping a floor, while I lifted my own mug, the plain one I had poured for myself in the kitchen when I arrived, and took a slow drink that tasted exactly like tea and nothing else. Mom's hand hovered over the table like she could stop time if she just pinched it between two fingers, and she said my sister's name even though her eyes were on me, and I said it was probably the chamomile since we all know how that goes for her. And I let the line sit there, because Mom is the one who keeps track of everyone's sensitivities and proudly reminds restaurants about it, which means she could not convincingly act surprised unless she wanted to admit she forgot the most basic thing about her favorite child, and I watched her choose between two bad stories, negligence or intent, and I saw the math happen behind her careful expression. You should know I did not walk into that house hoping for this exact scene, but I did go in with a plan because I have learned that when someone calls a meeting to make peace and insists on choosing the setting, the timing, the menu, and the script, the only power you have is to refuse your lines, and I was not going to sip from a cup she handed me and then spend the rest of the evening trying to convince myself the aftertaste was in my head, the way I have done more times than I care to admit. My sister, who is not cruel but has always been used as a mirror to reflect what I am not, looked at Mom while she coughed and wheezed into the napkin, embarrassed more than scared, waiting for reassurance that she was fine and that I was overreacting as usual. And I let the silence stretch because sometimes silence is the only tool that forces the truth onto the table, and in that pause I felt the steady click of the gate inside me that used to swing open whenever Mom wanted access to my guilt. Or my doubt, now locking shut, now holding. Mom recovered her tone first, saying it must be the honey or maybe the tea was stronger than she meant it to be, and she offered water and a different cup and an apology shaped like a question, and I said I would stick with what I brought because I know what is in it, which sounded petty even to me, but I let it stand because there is a kind of pettiness that is just boundary with a spine, and if she wanted me to play ungrateful daughter it would not be the first time. What I did not say, because we were not ready for that part yet, was that she had texted me the night before with a string of messages about family healing and turning the page and how she hated the distance between us, and then slipped in a line about how she had found the perfect tea for my nerves, a gentle blend she picked up from a wellness place she likes, and the way she typed the word gentle landed wrong in my gut, not because I expected poison like a movie, but because I know how she uses gentleness as a cover for pressure, and I decided right then that if she insisted on choosing the cup I would insist on choosing the mouth it touched first. My sister's breathing settled the way it always does after those small reactions, her eyes a little watery and her smile a little forced, and she said she was fine, and Mom agreed too quickly, then told me again that she just wants us to start fresh. And I said that starting fresh usually means everyone admits what the old start looked like, and that part tends to be where our attempts fall apart, which made my sister shift in her chair because she hates conflict that does not have an immediate fix, and Mom did the tilted head thing she does when she is deciding whether to play wounded or outraged. There was a time when I would have grabbed the cup, sniffed it, accused her of something I could not prove, and then been called dramatic for ruining dinner, but I have learned that the cleaner move is to let actions testify and watch who scrambles to rewrite the transcript. And right now the only scrambling in the room was coming from the one person who insists she never forgets details, including which of her daughters has a problem with a certain gentle blend. She finally asked why I handed the cup to my sister, and I told her I trust family, which is the kind of line she loves when it works in her favor and hates when it does not. And when she said my name in that soft warning voice that used to make me apologize before I knew what for, I set my mug down and looked at her in a way that told her the trick where she names my feelings before I can form them would not play here, not today, not ever again. The table noise started up again with everyone pretending to be normal, silverware and small talk and faked laughter filling the space where a real conversation should have been. And I let it wash past, because I was not here to win a debate in front of relatives who prefer holidays tidy. I was here to draw a line I could live with, and to measure the distance between what Mom says she wants and what she actually does when no one is watching. Except this time someone was, and that someone was me. So when Mom reached for the cup again like she might remove the evidence or pour it down the sink or replace it with something I could not track, I put my hand out without touching it and said I would clean up later. And I gave her a look I learned from years of being the one blamed for messes I did not make, a look that says we can pretend this is about tea if you want, but we both know it is about control. And while my sister dabbed her mouth and said she was fine for the third time, I took another slow drink from my own mug and let the moment hold, because the next words out of my mother's mouth would tell me whether we were actually starting over or just resetting the same trap with better manners. And I was more than ready to hear which story she chose to tell. By the time the plates were scraped and stacked and the noise of everyone pretending nothing strange had happened settled into that polite hush that makes a house feel like a museum, I was standing at the sink pretending to care about a stubborn sauce, while replaying the way Mom's face had flinched when I moved the cup. And I could feel that old familiar pressure in my chest that used to show up every time I did not immediately apologize for ruining a mood I did not create, the same pressure. That started when I was a kid and learned that in our family there was a helpful story about me, a tidy label that explained everything, and it went like this. I was the difficult one, the intense one, the one who could take a joke if I really tried harder, while my sister was sunshine and ease and pure intention, and any time things went sideways the easiest fix was to redirect all the friction toward me because I knew how to absorb it without crying in public, which made me useful in the same way. A rug is useful when someone drops their glass and does not want to get down on their knees and pick every shard out of the floor. It sounds dramatic, and maybe it is, but the small scenes are the ones that stick, like the birthday my cake disappeared into the freezer because the guest list was light and Mom said it would be smarter to save it for a busier weekend. Only the busy weekend never came and the freezer burned edge tasted like apology the month I finally cut into it myself. Or the graduation that became a scheduling conflict because my sister's rehearsal dinner needed a different centerpiece and Mom needed me to be flexible, which is the word she loves when it comes to my plans and the word she forgets when it comes to hers. Or the afternoon she leaned close after a family barbecue and told me, softly and with what she would call love, that some people just are not built for the kind of warmth my sister gives off without trying, and that it is not a crime to be the kind of person who is better in a crisis than in a celebration, and that if I could accept that, we would all be happier. And I remember standing there holding a stack of paper plates and thinking, so the problem is that I am not a party trick. If you grow up inside that kind of story, you either break yourself trying to fit it, or you keep a private notebook that tracks the moments when the narrator forgets her lines. And I chose the second option, not with a real notebook because I did not want to be caught, but with the kind of mental ledger you build to stay steady when the ground keeps moving, and that ledger is why, after the tea stunt and the careful silence and the weak laughter, I was not going to leave this kitchen without taking a good look at what Mom calls her wellness supplies, because when someone insists on being seen as the caretaker while also insisting that you are the problem, the kindest thing you can do for your own sanity is to check the cabinets. The cabinet above the stove used to hold spices, and now it holds a curated gallery of health. And there they were, a row of amber bottles with their labels peeled back until the glue was a chalky ring and the names were gone. A cluster of small glass jars with handwritten tape that said nothing useful like gentle and calm and rest, and a tin that rattled like it wanted an audience. And I stood there with the door open and my dish towel over my shoulder and my breath doing that slow, steady count I use when I do not want to blast through a situation just because my nerves are high, and I reached in and brought the bottles down one at a time, not dumping, not rummaging, just lining them up so that if anyone walked in it would look like cleaning instead of a search. I am not a chemist, and I do not pretend to be one, but I do know what chamomile smells like, and I know how my sister's throat sounds after it, and I know that when someone who brags about attention to detail uses tape labels that could mean anything, it is not an accident. It is a choice, and while the kettle clicked itself back to ready, I took my phone out, turned off the flash, and took pictures of everything: the bottles, the tape, the residue under the lids, the faint scrape marks where a name had been peeled off, the little tea balls in the tin that looked like they had been rolled tight by a patient hand, and then I put everything back exactly the way I found it except for one small thing that I will admit I did, because I was tired of playing defense, which was to slip a clean white label from the drawer where Mom keeps her crafts and write the word gentle in the rounded script she taught us for thank you cards, then stick it on the jar that smelled strongest and set that jar on the counter right in the path from the dining room to the sink. Call it petty, call it theatrical, call it a message written without using the word accusation, but when my sister came in with the napkins and saw the jar and read the label out loud with that awkward laugh she uses when she does not know what side to stand on, and when I said, casual as anything, that this might be the blend that makes her wheeze and that we should probably toss it or at least ask a pharmacist to look at it so we stop playing guessing games with her throat, and when Mom followed her in and froze just a beat too long before smiling at the jar like it was a toddler making a mess we could all laugh about, I felt something in me shift from defense to offense in a way that did not require me to raise my voice or make a scene. Because my small revenge was not a loud revelation, it was an invitation for the golden child to question the hand that has always positioned itself as care. Mom tried to pass it off as a mislabeled sleep mix and reached for the jar with that steady hostess movement that turns every correction into a service. And I moved it a fraction of an inch away with one finger and said that since we all care about health and starting fresh, I would take this to my sister's doctor in the morning so we could get clarity and stop relying on hunches, and my sister, who hates appointments and conflict but hates wheezing more, nodded before Mom could answer, which was the first crack I have seen in that old alignment in a very long time, and the look that crossed Mom's face was not fear and not guilt, but something scarier for a person who lives on control, which is the recognition that the script had slipped from her hand and landed in mine, at least for the night. I did not push, I did not accuse, I just dried my hands and told them I had already booked the time because I wanted us all to stop guessing, and I watched Mom calculate whether to forbid it, to bless it, or to sabotage it. And when she finally said that of course we should be thorough and that she would come along, which sounded generous and felt like surveillance, I smiled in that polite way you learn from years of holiday diplomacy and said that the appointment was just for the two of us, because the office gets crowded, and I tucked my phone with the cabinet photos back into my pocket and felt the smallest lift in my chest, not triumph exactly, but a clean kind of satisfaction that comes from making a move that cannot be spun without someone telling on themselves. And as I carried the labeled jar to my bag and heard Mom say my name in that slow, careful way reserved for moments when she thinks she can still redirect me, I turned and told her we would bring back answers, real ones, the kind that do not need labels peeled off, and the way her mouth pressed into a line told me that tomorrow had just become the day the story stopped cooperating, which was exactly the point. The next morning started in that soft, deceptive calm that comes after a storm no one wants to name, and I decided that if my mother, whose name is Linda when I am speaking to people who do not understand what it means to have a parent who can turn kindness into currency and guilt into glue, wanted a truce that required me to swallow doubt along with whatever she brewed, then I would give her the performance she expected while moving the pieces she could not see, which is how I ended up driving My sister, whose name is Hannah and who still wants to believe our family is fixable with the right playlist and a decent brunch. To a mid-morning appointment I framed as routine, but treated in my own head like a small investigation with a friendly witness and a clean table. I did not march in with accusations because that is a game I have played and lost, the one where you present your fear like a closing argument and everyone else presents their comfort like it is evidence. So instead I answered questions in the calm way you learn after years of being told your tone is the real problem. And I described the throat rasp that shows up for Hannah when certain herbs sneak into tea, and how those herbs have a way of being offered by a woman who prides herself on remembering everybody's sensitivities, but somehow keeps misplacing this one, and I set the clean jar with the label I had written in my mother's round script on the counter and asked, in a normal voice that was firm enough to carry and gentle enough to look harmless, whether we could stop guessing and map out what triggers what so that holidays do not turn into roulette with napkins and apologies. The nurse, who had that steady presence that makes you feel silly for waiting so long to ask for something basic, walked through cross reactions and suggested avoiding chamomile and ragweed relatives for a while. Then politely recommended that anyone making drinks for Hannah use labeled ingredients and skip the blends with names that sound like home goods collections, and when she added that unlabeled jars were a bad idea in any kitchen where people want to stay healthy, I did not say a word about cabinets or glue residue or a lifetime of my mother insisting she is the safest pair of hands in any room. I just said thank you and made sure Hannah heard the part about labels twice. On the drive home, while Hannah scrolled her phone and tried to make light of it like she always does when she is afraid of picking a side, I told her there is a difference between forgiveness and amnesia, and that if we loved our mother we had to stop letting her hide behind hospitality while she keeps control by keeping everyone slightly off balance, and I watched my sister put that thought in her mouth like a new kind of food and decide whether to swallow or spit. And to my surprise she swallowed, then said she was tired of the wheezing and the pretending and that she would tell Mom to stop with the mystery jars, a small sentence that landed like a drumroll inside my chest because it meant we were finally more than one person asking for basic safety. I did not wait for Mom to comply because I have lived long enough to know compliance is a costume she wears only until the audience looks away, so I stopped at a store that sells practical things and bought a label maker, a set of clear jars with tamper-evident bands, and a bright white storage bin with a snap lid. Then I drove straight to her house and announced on the family group text, with a cheerful tone I have learned to weaponize without sounding mean, that we were doing a kitchen reset. For the sake of Hannah's health and that I had brought supplies to make the whole process easy, and within minutes I had a chorus of thumbs up from aunts and cousins who love a home project, which meant Mom could not shut it down without looking like the one person against health and order, a role she refuses even when it fits. In the kitchen, I moved with the calm, unhurried efficiency of someone who has finally realized that acting small only feeds the story that keeps her small, and I lined every mystery jar on the counter like little soldiers waiting for inspection. And I asked Hannah to read ingredients out loud while I typed neat labels and sealed lids with bands that would show if anyone later swapped contents, and every time Mom reached to reclaim something with a joke about how I was overdoing it and how in her day we did not need gadgets to know what was in our food, I smiled and said that in this day we do. And then I slid the bright white bin into the center cabinet with a printed label that said approved for Hannah so that any hand reaching for herbs would have to bypass a box that announced accountability in a font no one could ignore. The small revenge, if you need me to name it, was not the label maker or the bands or the bin. It was the way I staged an audience that my mother could not edit. Because while we worked I sent a quick picture to the family chat of Hannah laughing while she scrolled the label tape, and I added a caption about safety upgrades for the hostess with the mostess. And within minutes the thread filled with relatives praising Mom's care and my initiative, and saying how smart it was to make sure Hannah could sip without worry, and the corner I saw my mother paint herself into was the one where she had to agree to the new system or admit she preferred ambiguity to safety, which even she could not sell to a crowd that has always believed she is the gold standard of care. By the time we finished and the jars looked official and the bin sat like a small white declaration of boundaries in a room that used to belong entirely to her, Mom set down a dish towel with the measured grace of a person who has realized a negotiation ended while she was busy arranging chairs, and she leaned in close enough that only I could hear her and asked, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, whether I thought I was clever, because clever girls think they can outmaneuver love, and I did not flinch or raise my voice or give her the reaction that would let her pivot to hurt. I just told her that clever is what daughters become when love starts to feel like a test with no passing grade. And as I gathered my bag and watched Hannah tuck the jar with the round gentle label into the approved bin like a piece on a board, she finally understood. My phone buzzed with a private message from Mom that said we needed to talk alone, not about tea but about respect, which I read twice before replying that respect is easier in rooms where every bottle has a name, and when the typing dots pulsed and then disappeared without an answer, I knew the next move would not be in a kitchen, and that whatever she had planned would step out of hospitality and into leverage, which was exactly where I wanted her to show herself. When Mom's message asking for a private talk finally turned into a time and a place, which she chose with that calculated softness she uses whenever she wants the world to believe a boundary conversation is actually a kindness check-in, I agreed without protest and met her at a small cafe where the servers know her name and she can count on a parade of greetings that frame her as the benevolent matriarch, and she opened with the kind of speech I have heard since high school about respect and tone and how public gestures, like my cheerful kitchen reset and the family chat photo of Hannah grinning with the label tape, can make a mother feel humiliated, and I let her get through the whole performance because I needed to hear which part she would circle in red. The safety or the optics, and right on cue, she landed on optics and called them wounds, which told me everything I needed to know about what mattered most to her in that room. I said that respect is easy in clean kitchens and that I am done apologizing for asking for labeled jars, and she said she never meant harm and that chamomile is not poison and that Hannah's reaction was probably anxiety because the holidays have been heavy. Then she added a line I could feel she had been saving, a line about how daughters who escalate to outside authorities make families look broken, and families that look broken do not get invited into opportunities, which is her gentle way of saying reputations have a market value and I should stop devaluing ours, and I told her that I have no interest in keeping a price high by discounting the truth. Then I offered a counterproposal with a smile that fit the room, which was that we would host a do-over dinner that very evening with everyone present, and I would announce a simple rule in her honor, a hospitality upgrade that protects Hannah and makes Mom look like the champion she believes she is, and everything served would come from factory-sealed boxes opened at the table with labels displayed, a tidy ritual that proves care without inviting suspicion, and I promised to say the idea was hers because she has always been ahead of trends. And she paused long enough for me to see the calculation and then agreed, which meant she thought she could outmaneuver a rule by owning it. I drove home and set the pieces quietly, starting with Hannah, who was already halfway to firm but needed the push that comes from a script you can hold in your mouth without stumbling, so I told her that tonight was not a fight, it was a standard. And that when Mom tried to improvise with a special cup or a secret blend, which she would, we would not accuse or argue, we would simply hold up the doctor's printed recommendations like a recipe card and stick to the rule we announced, and I told her that if Mom tried to frame this as me undermining her, she should say, in her own voice, that she was tired of guessing games with her throat and that she wants her life to be boring in the exact ways that keep a person breathing, and Hannah, who likes harmony but hates performative safety, nodded with the kind of resolve that comes when you realize a line has been crossed so many times there is no path back except through. Because leverage is the language Mom respects, I added 2 small moves that would not draw blood but would make denial expensive, the first being a short, warm message in the family group reminding everyone how thoughtful Mom had been to agree to sealed packaging for the relaunch dinner, a note sprinkled with praise that would require a person to either accept public credit for safety or publicly refuse it, and the second being a scheduled pickup I arranged through the wellness store where she shops using her loyalty number that I have known since I was a teenager filling out forms for her, a pickup that would exchange any unlabeled loose blends for sealed boxes under a new policy they were piloting. which meant that tomorrow morning a clerk would arrive to collect whatever anonymous jars remained on her shelves and leave a receipt with itemized labels, a convenience I framed in the confirmation email I forwarded to her as a gift that saves her time. Though the real gift was the paper trail. Dinner looked like most of our family dinners do at the start, with aunts staging side dishes and cousins pretending to remember everyone's dietary quirks and mom moving through the room like a small weather system that always promises sunshine if you step into it and agree to forget yesterday's rain. And when the moment for drinks arrived and she lifted a single delicate cup in my direction with the kind of smile that suggests magnanimity from a higher ground, I thanked her warmly, lifted the sealed box I had placed at the center of the table like a prop in a demonstration, and announced that we are inaugurating her new safety ritual by opening everything in sight at the table, with labels facing out. And people clapped the way family claps for toasts that require no bravery, and the applause was still fading when Mom made her first misstep and said that a single special cup never hurt anyone, and Hannah, who has spent a lifetime choosing silence because it keeps the peace, put her hand over mine in a gesture that looked sweet and felt like a baton pass, then said with a voice that wobbled for half a second and then steadied that she was done taking chances with mystery blends and that she would only drink what came out of a box we all could read. And the table shifted, not loudly but definitively, toward her. I did not waste the turn, so while the relatives murmured approval I slid a printed page next to Mom's plate. The doctor's recommendations shrunk to fit on one sheet with the sentences about unlabeled jars highlighted. And I kept my tone friendly and my face open as I told her I had already scheduled the exchange at her favorite store so that all her thoughtful herbs would come back in boxes with ingredients printed large enough for anyone to read, and that I would handle the pickup if she was busy. And she stared at the paper and then at me with that cool, measured look that used to undo me, and she said softly that this was all very theatrical for something as simple as tea. And I said softly that theater ends when the lights come up and that I prefer lights. And then a cousin asked Hannah how she felt, and Hannah said she felt listened to for the first time in a long time, which is the kind of sentence that pries a lid off a family without any raised voices. The small revenge, which did not feel small as it landed, was watching my mother nod along to a rule she had no intention of honoring a day ago because the room would no longer buy the old story that my discomfort was the real hazard. And when she reached for the delicate cup and set it aside with a performative laugh about how she forgot we had a new ritual now, I let the moment sit because a concession is not real until it costs the person something they care about, and the thing she cares about most is control, which is why the next move came exactly as I expected. A new story told in a careful voice about how she had been very generous given that she had proof, actual proof, that I had relabeled her jars to make her look careless. And while the room held its breath, she tapped her phone, said the word camera, and announced there was footage from the kitchen the night before, that she had just dropped a link into the family chat, and that everyone deserved to see what really happened, which is when chairs scraped, phones lit, and the air thinned in that particular way that tells you a storm you invited is finally over your house. When the link hit the family chat and the usual chorus of polite relatives slid their chairs back to squint at their phones while pretending this was an interesting technical moment rather than a public trial, I did not rush to defend myself or snatch anyone's device or plead my case, because the thing about footage without sound is that it tells you exactly what a person wants you to see and nothing about why. So I let them watch the silent clip of me lining up jars and applying neat white labels and sealing lids like a woman who has decided order beats chaos, and I waited while Mom narrated in that careful tone about how I had altered her kitchen and humiliated her. And when the last cousin lifted her head and someone muttered that it did look a little deliberate, I agreed out loud that it was deliberate, because safety is deliberate. And then I slid the doctor's printed recommendations back onto the table so that the highlighted sentence about avoiding unlabeled blends sat beside every plate like a place card, and I asked Hannah to read the line about ragweed and chamomile out loud so the room would hear the word that made her throat tighten last night, and when she did, steady for once, I saw two things happen at the same time, which were my sister finding her voice and my mother realizing the range of it. Mom said the labels were a stunt, and I said stunts are for audiences, and this was for a medical file, and when she countered that the footage proved I had framed her, I opened my photos and passed my phone to the aunt who always mediates these scenes like she is guiding an office training, and I asked her to scroll through the images I took of the cabinet before I touched anything, the glue rings where names had been peeled, the scratch marks under the lids, the row of anonymous amber bottles. That would get a person scolded in any school lab, and I pointed out the timestamps stamped by the same cloud backup mom trusts for her grandchild photos, and I let the room do the math that said the erasing happened long before my labels appeared, and then, because no trap is complete until there is a cost for denial, the doorbell rang exactly when I wanted it to, and the courier in a polo stepped in with a clipboard and a bright smile and a script he had learned from corporate about pilot programs for safety, and he announced that he was there to pick up unlabeled loose herbal products from this address because the account holder had enrolled in an exchange that would return everything in sealed boxes with clear ingredients. And I looked at my mother and said I knew how busy she was, so I set it up to save her the trouble, and the way her jaw set told me she wanted to refuse, but the way the room watched told me she could not. We walked to the kitchen like a procession. The courier opening his bin, Hannah opening the cabinet, my aunts whispering about how modern stores think of everything, and Mom quietly naming each jar as if that could retroactively create a record. And one by one the anonymous containers landed in the courier's box until the shelves looked strangely naked, and when he read back the estimated contents based on smell and texture to ensure accuracy, peppering the list with words like chamomile and calendula and a few I could not pronounce, Hannah touched her throat without even noticing and said she would stick with sealed boxes forever, which sounded like a small sentence until you remember that my mother lives on the currency of being trusted to pour. And then it becomes an eviction notice from a role she has guarded like a crown. Mom tried one last pivot, saying that none of this proved intention and that families should extend grace, and I said that I have grace to spare and boundaries to match. And then I asked the courier to leave the receipt on the table and to circle the line where it says itemized labels will be provided upon exchange, because paper beats story in houses where stories have been used as leashes. And he circled it with a flourish and left, and the minute the door shut the relatives scattered toward dishes and distraction the way people do when they want to feel useful rather than implicated, leaving the three of us at the table with the doctor's handout and a receipt that looked like a verdict even though it did not name a crime. I told Mom I was done with secrets that call themselves care, and that going forward I would host any gathering that involved Hannah's throat or my peace of mind, and that the rule would be plain and enforceable and boring. Which is the sort of safety I wish we had grown up with, and when she said I was stealing her home right out from under her, I told her homes are not stolen, they are either shared or staged, and I was declining to audition for a part that kept me sick. And then I added the one sentence I had been saving, which was that I would not be drinking anything she handed me ever again, not as a punishment, and not as a performance, but as a decision that frees us both from the next argument about whether my instincts are the real problem, because instincts are not problems, they're alarms that stop letting you sleep through fires. Hannah picked up the delicate cup from last night and carried it to the sink and turned it upside down like a tiny ceremony, and then she said she would be staying with me for a while so she could reset without wheezing and without walking on eggshells about optics. And Mom stared at her as if the wrong daughter had just been chosen for a prize that was never really a prize, and I felt the old ache show up and then pass, because you cannot win a game you refuse to play, and that refusal was the win. So when Mom asked whether I felt proud of myself, whether I thought this made me clever, I told her I was not aiming for clever, I was aiming for quiet. The kind of quiet where no one needs to prove they are not crazy just to drink from a cup at their own mother's table. And I stood up and stacked plates and let the silence work, and in that silence I understood something simple and unromantic and entirely mine, which is that I will never drink from her hand again, and I will never apologize for choosing a life where my body does not have to translate love into symptoms, and across the table she understood it too, because for the first time in a very long time, she did not reach for the cup or the script or my guilt, and that, more than any confession she will never give me, was the moment I took back the room and kept it.